Germany did not lose its auto industry. It watched it leave. The difference between those two sentences is worth understanding because one implies a victim and the other implies a choice. Germany made choices, specific ones, with full awareness of the consequences over more than a decade. And the $400 billion industry those choices put at risk is not an abstraction. It is 800,000 direct jobs, 1.8 million indirect jobs, the single largest export sector of Europe's largest economy. It is leaving, not dramatically, not in a single announcement, quietly, factory by factory, decision by decision, quarter by quarter, one number before anything else. In 2023, China exported more cars than any other country. For the first time in history, more than Japan, more than South Korea, more than Germany. China, which in 2015 was still largely an importer of foreign vehicles, became the world's largest car exporter in under a decade. That is not a market shift. That is a structural reversal. That took less time to complete than a typical car development cycle. And the German auto industry, which spent those same years managing an emissions scandal, debating electrification timelines, and navigating EU regulatory complexity, was not watching. It was the target. Here is a question that has no comfortable answer. When did German automakers realize they were losing? Because the data was available. The signals were visible. BYD's cost structure was documented. Chinese EV subsidies were public. The speed of Chinese manufacturing scale-up was measurable. So when did Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes see it clearly? And what did they do with that information? We will come back to that. To understand what is happening to Germany's auto industry, you need to understand one concept first: legacy cost structure versus clean sheet cost structure. A legacy cost structure is what every established automaker carries. Pension obligations for workers hired 30 years ago, union agreements negotiated across decades, factory footprints designed for internal combustion engines, supplier relationships built around components that electric vehicles do not need. A clean sheet cost structure is what you get when you build an industry from nothing. Modern manufacturing processes, flexible labor agreements, no legacy obligations, no weight from the past. Germany has the first. China's leading EV manufacturers have the second. And in a technology transition, where the entire product architecture changes, the clean sheet wins. Not because it is better managed, because it does not carry the weight of what came before. Here is what that actually means. German automakers are not competing against Chinese innovation. They are competing against Chinese freedom from their own history. And that is a race they did not design themselves to win. Let's talk about BYD, because most Western financial coverage still treats BYD as an emerging challenger, a company to watch, a potential threat. BYD is not a potential threat. In 2023, BYD sold more electric vehicles globally than Tesla. Now, step back for a second. BYD's average selling price per vehicle, $23,000. Volkswagen's average selling price, $38,000. BYD's gross margin on its vehicles is higher than Volkswagen's. Read that again. A Chinese manufacturer selling cars at $15,000 less than Volkswagen is generating higher gross margins. That is not a pricing strategy. That is a cost structure advantage so fundamental that it cannot be closed by engineering improvements or management efficiency programs. It can only be closed by restructuring at a scale that German labor law, union agreements, and political reality make nearly impossible to execute at speed. Volkswagen understood this. In late 2024, Volkswagen announced it was considering closing German factories for the first time in its 87-year history. Not restructuring, not reducing shifts, not offering early retirement packages. Closing. The response from German unions was immediate. IG Metall, Germany's most powerful industrial union, called it a declaration of war. Strikes were threatened. Political pressure was applied. And here is what that response reveals, more clearly than any financial analysis can. Germany's auto industry is trapped between two forces that cannot both be satisfied. The commercial reality says, reduce cost structure dramatically and immediately, or lose market share permanently. The political reality says, protect jobs, honor union agreements, and maintain the social contract that German industrial workers have relied on for generations. These two forces are incompatible. And the gap between them, the space where the decision cannot be made, is exactly where German competitiveness goes to die. Which raises the question nobody in Berlin is answering clearly. If you cannot restructure fast enough to compete, and you cannot afford not to compete, what exactly is the plan? Now here's the part that most coverage misses entirely. The problem is not just BYD. The problem is the supply chain collapse that follows. When a car manufacturer loses market share permanently, the entire ecosystem around it contracts. The specialist component suppliers, the precision tool makers, the software engineers embedded in Tier 1 automotive suppliers, the logistics networks optimized for just-in-time delivery to German factories. These businesses did not build their capabilities for the global market. They built them for German automakers. The numbers are already visible. Robert Bosch 5,500 job cuts. ZF Friedrichshafen 14,000 job cuts. These are not peripheral companies. These are the companies that make German auto manufacturing possible. And once a supplier ecosystem contracts at this scale, industrial decline is not just loss of output. It is loss of memory. The engineering knowledge embedded in 30 years of supplier relationships. The process expertise that cannot be documented or transferred. The tacit understanding of how complex systems fit together. Once that goes, it does not come back. Here is where it becomes genuinely unpredictable. German automakers are not passive in this story. Volkswagen is investing heavily in its own battery technology. BMW has committed to software-defined vehicle architecture. Mercedes is repositioning toward ultra-premium. These are rational strategies, but they share one vulnerability. They all assume that German automakers have time. Time to retrain workforces, time to restructure supply chains, time to close the cost gap with Chinese competitors while maintaining market share. That assumption may be the most dangerous one in European industry right now, because BYD is not standing still while Volkswagen restructures. BYD is opening factories in Hungary, in Turkey, in Brazil, building the exact kind of local manufacturing presence that allowed Japanese automakers to permanently displace American ones in the 1980s. The Japanese did not just export better cars, they built local routes that made their presence permanent. BYD is doing the same, faster. Europe lost 10 percentage points of global auto manufacturing share in the last 15 years. The speed of that loss is accelerating. Chinese EV manufacturers now hold approximately 25% of the global EV market outside China. In 2020, that number was effectively zero, 25% in 4 years. In a market where German manufacturers spent decades building brand equity, dealer networks, and customer loyalty. Brand equity does not protect you when the price gap is $15,000. Dealer networks do not protect you when direct-to-consumer models bypass them entirely. Customer loyalty does not survive 3 consecutive model cycles where the alternative is cheaper, better equipped, and backed by a government willing to subsidize adoption at scale. The timing of the full German auto reckoning? Unknown. The direction? It is not. The people running German automakers are not stupid. They have the data. They see BYD's cost structure. They understand what happened to American automakers when Japanese competition arrived. Which means one of 2 things is true. Either they believe the transition can be managed, that German engineering excellence, brand premium, and EU regulatory protection can buy enough time to close the gap. Or they have concluded privately that the German cost structure cannot be made competitive. And the strategy is not transformation. The strategy is managed contraction. Protect the premium segment, exit volume, shrink with dignity. Neither answer is what 800,000 German auto workers were promised. Both are being quietly prepared for. If you hold German equities, European auto sector exposure, or any asset whose value depends on German industrial output remaining at current levels, you do not need to predict exactly how this ends. You need to stop assuming it ends the way it has always ended before. Because this time the competitor is not arriving with a better version of the same product. It is arriving with a fundamentally different cost structure, backed by state capital, at a scale Germany's political system cannot respond to at the required speed. One question, and your honest answer matters. Do you think German automakers can close the cost gap with Chinese EV manufacturers in time, or is the restructuring already too slow to matter? Leave your answer below. If this raised questions you had not fully considered, subscribe. Because the next video covers something hiding inside this story that almost nobody is talking about, which German auto suppliers are being quietly acquired, right now, by Chinese manufacturers who do not want the brand. They want the engineering knowledge. They want the memory. The acquisitions are already happening. The knowledge is already moving. The only question is whether you see it before it is priced in.